Hello and welcome to Breakfast for Pancakes. I'm your host, PK Sullivan. This week, I'm tackling that Mexican restaurant classic, beef fajitas. And for a twist, I'm doing it all on the griddle right here in my kitchen. Ready? Let's do it. Let's start with the marinade. You'll need chipotle peppers and adobo, garlic, lime juice, mezcal, fish sauce, orange juice, soy sauce, oregano, cumin. Bust out your mortar and pestle and mash the chipotle into a paste. A mortar and pestle works by grinding food between two rough surfaces. Mine is ceramic with the head of the pestle and inside of the mortar's bowl left unglazed. It works well for breaking down foods, but the grinding does give me the shivers, so my technique isn't very good. Still, this is a good tool to have in your kitchen and know how to use. Grate the garlic on a microplane grater. You want all 4 cloves to be a fine pulp when they get mixed in with the liquids. To complete the marinade, add everything to a medium bowl and whisk vigorously. This marinade doesn't have any oil, so don't worry about emulsifying it. The worst that might happen is some of the solids will fall to the bottom of the bowl. Just whisk it a bit more right before you mix it in with the meat, and you'll be fine. Not a big deal. For right now, just get everything whisked together as we get started on the rest of the fajitas. To make your fajitas, you'll need skirt steak, the marinade, onion, bell peppers, olive oil, salt, pepper, flour tortillas. I picked up a nice big chunk of skirt steak from my butcher. It was about 900 grams, 2 pounds, before I trimmed it down. The steak was surprisingly fatty. Skirt steaks have a membrane along the back that needs to be removed. You can just pull that off. If you've ever made pork ribs, it's the same process as removing the membrane from the backs of those. Discard the membrane, it's not edible. To trim the steak, remove any exterior fat. The steak is going to cook quickly and won't really have much time to render out. If you remember from my congee episode, the key to a tender piece of skirt steak is all in how you slice it. The grain in this steak is very pronounced. Cut thin strips against the grain and you'll have a tender, delicious piece of beef even if you cook it to well done. I mentioned that this steak is surprisingly fatty. Look at this marveling. It's gorgeous. Here's a quick primer on how to marinate food in a plastic zipper bag. Start by folding the top of the bag down so that there's a cuff all around the opening. This does 2 things. First, it lets you hold the bag up and open with a single hand under the cuff, keeping your other hand free to add food to the bag. Secondly, it keeps the zipper away from the food so you won't mess up the zipper's ability to seal. With your bag prepped, add your protein. Now that the bag will stand on its own, unfold the cuff, pour in your marinade. Massage the contents of the bag to mix the marinade evenly. Then squeeze out as much air as you can. Place the bag in a bowl or other vessel in case it does leak or break, and put everything in the fridge. The steak needs to marinate for at least 30 minutes, but can go for a few hours. I'm all about that radial slice tutorial lately, so here it is again. Cut your onions in half pole to pole. We're just going for slices, so trim off both poles, then peel the outer layers. Now slice your onion, always cutting at an angle such that your knife goes towards the center of the onion. For the most even slices, offset your knife just a tad so it doesn't go entirely to the center, but stops short. This is to keep the innermost layers of onion from being paper thin. Once you've got all your onions sliced up, set them in a bowl off to the side. These are going to be cut julienne. Basically that means sliced thinly. Trim off the tops and bottoms of your peppers, then peel away the flesh from the core and pith. It's pretty simple. Just slice into the pepper, going all the way from the top to the bottom, and unroll the pepper as you go along. Keep your knife close to the pepper wall to remove as much of the pith as possible. You don't want to eat that, it's bitter. Now cut your pepper into chunks that will lie flat on the cutting board. Generally 3 or 4 chunks per pepper, depending on how it was shaped. Slice those top to bottom about a 1/4 inch thick. That's roughly 6 millimeters. Then scoop up all your peppers and add them to the bowl with the onions. Pour 30 milliliters of olive oil on your peppers and onions. Add a good pinch of salt and a few grains of black pepper. then toss everything together. You want all the veggies to be lightly coated with oil. If you've got pieces of onion that are stubbornly hanging onto one another, go ahead and break those up too. Now we're ready for the griddle. Preheat your griddle per the manufacturer's instructions. Mine gets preheated over low heat on all 5 burners for about 15 minutes. I set all the knobs between 2 and 3. Once it's good and hot, rub a quick drizzle of oil across it just so it shines a bit. This will keep food from sticking and build up the non-stick patina on the griddle. I started by griddling the tortillas. They take up a lot of space and I don't want them picking up flavors from the other food. Give them a minute or so per side and transfer them to a tortilla warmer or a plate covered with a clean towel. They'll stay warm and pliable until the rest of the food is ready. Peppers and onions take a while to cook on a griddle. I think it has something to do with the open space and how they don't steam themselves the way they do in a skillet. At any rate, they seem to take longer on a griddle than they do in a pan, so get those on first. Just pick one side of the griddle. Stir them occasionally, but for the most part, they'll just do their thing nice and slow. On the other side of the grill goes your beef, your chicken, or whatever you're making for your fajitas. Spread that out in a flat layer, keeping in mind that there will be hot spots directly over the burners on your griddle. Watch those areas to make sure nothing burns. It only took about 4 minutes to cook this pound of steak to medium, with a good amount of browning all along the outside. The onions and peppers needed to saute for a few more minutes, so I took this time to clean up the beef side of the griddle. Scrape away any stuck food, deglazing with water as needed. Push debris through the grease trap holes at the front of the griddle. Remove the peppers and onions once they've cooked to your preference. I like mine pretty well sauteed and soft, with some color and hopefully a bit of char on them. Clean up that side of the griddle, then oil it the way you would any cast iron or carbon steel pan. To build your fajitas, you'll need tortillas, cooked skirt steak, sauteed peppers and onions, salsa, maybe some guacamole, a bit of sour cream, extra cilantro, and some more diced red onion. You can use a store-bought salsa and guacamole, but what kind of cooking show would this be if I didn't throw some together? While there will be recipes in the show description, I don't really subscribe to the idea that either salsa or guacamole need a recipe. Both of them should be built to taste. Your taste, and I'm not you. What I'm doing here is a rough guideline to give you a starting point. Anyway, here's pretty much everything you need to make a basic, quick pico de gallo. Start by chopping your tomatoes. I have a few different colored heirlooms here. Those will give me some nice color, and they look the ripest out of everything at the grocery. For a lot of recipes, I'll be meticulous about removing all the seeds and jelly, but for pico, not necessary. I trim off the stem and most of the core, then chop up what's left and add it to the bowl. Red onion is key for a good pico de gallo. I'm doing the radial chop I showed in the D. Betty Crocker casserole recipe, except I'm chopping it much finer into a mince. I love this technique so much more than the crosscut everybody learns. This is just half an onion. I had it left over from another dish. I'm going to mince it all because otherwise it would go to waste. A few good scoops of onion from the blade of my knife is good enough for this salsa. A pico de gallo does need garlic, so grate a whole clove right into the bowl with your microplane. Or 2 cloves, or 3. Again, go to your taste. A good pinch or 2 of salt comes next, and will start to pull moisture out of the ingredients and get the flavors to mingle. Lime juice adds some needed acidity. I used about half a lime. Now for the heat. This is just a jalapeno. Cut it in half, remove the seeds and pith, then mince it. An easy way to mince a pepper like this is to cut it into strips, but leave it all connected at one end, sort of like the fringe on a 70s leather jacket. Once you've fringed the whole pepper, turn it 90 degrees and mince, working from the fringe side all the way back to the intact side. Mix everything together, taste your salsa, adjust as needed, and set aside to let the flavors mingle for at least 10 minutes before serving. Next up, chop some cilantro. We'll go back and add some to the pico in a minute. My wife likes guacamole, but she doesn't like spicy things, so the guac you're about to see doesn't have any hot peppers. But, like I said, this is just a starting point, more of a guideline. I encourage you to make your own choices for your own guacamole. Start with a ripe avocado. Cut it in half, pull the pole, working your knife all the way around once it connects with the pit. Gently twist the two halves and they should separate. Carefully chop into the pit with your knife, then twist to remove it from the avocado. Cut the avocado using a crosshatch pattern. Be sure to slice all the way through the flesh, but stop when your knife hits the skin. It's a delicate piece of work, but I believe in you. It's best to use a really thin knife. My Santoku works great. I don't recommend using a traditional chef's knife. It's too thick and will start to push the avocado apart. A large spoon is best for scooping the flesh out of the skin and into a bowl. Grate another clove of garlic directly into the bowl. The other half of that lime gets juiced in there too. Add a pinch of salt. Get a fork and mash the guacamole to your liking. Some people like it chunky, some people like it almost pureed. The choice is yours. Add minced red onion and chopped cilantro to taste. I have another tomato, and this one I am going to be fastidious about removing all of the seeds and jelly. Those are no good for guacamole. This tomato also gets chopped finer than for the pico de gallo, though not quite minced. Add tomato to your guac to taste and give it all a good stir. Taste it, adjust flavors as needed, and set aside. Now to finish that pico. Scoop up all the remaining tomato, add it to the salsa, along with a good amount of cilantro. Stir everything together. Do another taste test, adjust flavors again as needed. One quick note on storing guac. If you aren't eating it right away, for instance, my wife wasn't due home for a few hours yet after I made this, you can cover it with plastic wrap pressed right down onto the surface. This is an oxygen barrier and will keep it from turning brown. The browning you see on cut fruits, including avocados, comes from oxidation. By putting that barrier in place, you stop oxygen from reaching your fruit and it won't oxidize. The word fajita means little strip, a reference to thinly sliced skirt steak. The skirt steak was a butcher's cut for centuries. A piece of beef the butcher or rancher kept for themselves because it was delicious but hard to sell. There are only 2 skirt steaks on a cow, totaling only a few pounds of meat. It's hard to sell in bulk unless you're killing thousands of cows at once. For centuries, that is not how cattle were slaughtered. The supposed etymology of fajita comes from the vaqueros, Mexican cowboys. They would be paid in part with these butcher's cuts of beef. Working with what they had, they'd slice it up and make tacos with them. These fajita tacos were first made for the public sometime in the 60s or 70s. That got shortened to fajitas as it rapidly commercialized and grew in popularity. At some point, restaurants started using chicken and other protein. Now the word fajita is most commonly associated with these tacos rather than specifically sliced skirt steak. In a lot of ways, fajitas are the case study for the interactivity theory of deliciousness. I think it's a key part of the dish's popularity. It's a socially acceptable way for a diner to play with their food. It's also a food for extroverts, people who want to command attention. A small pile of tortillas and trays of toppings are delivered tableside. The people at your table are forced to notice when you order fajitas simply because you now take up so much of the table. Don't just follow this recipe for the toppings. Make it your own. If you want cheese, rice, beans, or a battered and deep fried poblano chile, go wild. Let your freak flag fly. Me? I'm getting a little bit of everything on screen. The beef, peppers, and onions are the bulk of my fajita, but I like a bit of everything. It gets messy, sure, but it's also super delicious. The spicy beef contrasts with the cool, creamy guacamole and sour cream. The pico de gallo is a bright kick that cuts through all the fat. The minced onion and cilantro adds a sharp, fresh character that wake up the senses. Tacos are always good, we know that. But tacos you get to play with at the table, those are great. Thank you for watching, I really appreciate it. This is my first foray into Mexican cooking here on the channel. If you want to see me tackle some other cuisine, please let me know down in the comments. I would love to cook whatever people want to see. Please like and subscribe, it really helps out the channel. And if you care to donate some money, my Patreon is linked down below. See you next time.